All right. Good morning, KW. I hope you guys are having an awesome start to your Tuesday morning here on Tuesday, April 6th. Today's going to be another 70-degree day here in the heat of the spring market. We got a ton of stuff coming at you guys this week. Starting off with a little bit of a mortgage update from the team at Fairway with Brian Clute and Blake Early. Then we're going to jump into some stuff around making sure that you're protecting yourselves when it comes time to writing offers with no inspections or taking excluded listings. You need to beware in both items to protect yourself around liability. And then I'm going to wrap it up around some interesting insights that I've gathered as we've wrapped up March, and so far that we're through the first trimester of the year, or first quarter of the year, first quarter of the year. What is the market telling us? And I'm actually going to go back to some insights that we've talked about before as it relates to how is the economic recovery impacting where we are in the market? And then I'll break it down by price segment too, so you guys can see and understand three very distinct things are happening in the marketplace and as it relates to economic recovery. So with that, Brian Clute, I'm turning it over to you to kick us off with a little bit of a market update around the mortgage industry, rates, and underwriting. So
awesome. Thanks, Charlie. And by the way, I saw the chat room. I do love the wake up music, so appreciate that. It's my third cup of coffee. Today is Tuesday, right? Yes, today is Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Mortgage market update for today. Next slide, please. Where are we currently? So as of, this is actually as of the 1st of April. And side note, Freddie Mac actually comes out with this update on a weekly basis. So if you guys ever want to just get a really quick kind of like down low, what are rates doing right now? A great place to go. And I'll make a note here to get this to everybody. Freddie Mac's got a website, you could bookmark it, and it's giving you the, hey, where are we right now with the 30-year fixed rate? The one thing I do want to point out is if you guys look at this, if you look at the numbers on the top where it says 30-year FRM, and then it shows that 3.18, right below that, in small print, it says 0.7 fees. So what's happening is that Freddie Mac is polling all lenders across the country and saying, hey, what's your rate today? And as a part of that poll, they're also asking what lenders are charging in what are called discount points or origination fees. And basically, that's just extra money borrowers are paying to get the rate that's being offered. So the good rule of thumb is that the rate you see on the Freddie Mac website is always going to be a little bit lower than what you're going to see in the Milwaukee market. Simply, the reason behind that is, generally speaking, buyers in this market don't pay points to get the interest rate. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So next slide, please. Also, I think it's really good to show some perspective of where are we right now. And this chart actually showed as of March 4th. So we'd have to take this up just a hair to about the 3.25, 3.3 range. So you can see that we're right back to where we were. And I'm looking at that chart to see, I think it was in about July of last year when we saw these rates. So, we dipped down on that 2.75. We're up to about just shy of 3.5. Next slide, please. Guys, this one to me is really powerful. And that is to say, what is the impact on affordability for a buyer? So what I did is I ran an analysis and said, if a buyer had a $300,000 loan and they locked their rate in last July at 2.8%, and then they locked it today, the impact for their monthly payment is about $82 a month. If I reverse engineer that, what I mean by that is for the buyer to keep the same exact payment that they would have had when interest rates were a little bit lower, they'd have to buy about $20,000 less in property. So, the interest rate increase does have obviously the impact on the payment, but I like to flip that around and say, well, that means the buyer really had the ability to buy about $20,000 less in real estate to keep their payment the same. So again, that's one of those things, just kind of keep it in your back pocket. Next slide, please. So Sam Cotter, chief economist at Fannie Mae, since reaching a low point in January, mortgage rates have risen by more than 30 basis points. And just to get into mortgage speak, that's the equivalent of about 0.25% in interest rate. The impact on the purchase demand has been noticeable. While purchase activity remains high, it has cooled off over the last few weeks and is currently on par with early March prior to the pandemic. However, the rise in mortgage rates over the next couple months is likely to be more muted in comparison to the last few weeks, and we expect a strong spring sales season. So for those of you saying, well, where are we going? My analysis, my interpretation of this, watching quite a few economists, we're going to see that, is that we saw the uptick, and I think things are going to stabilize here for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. All that said, I thought this was an awesome quote from an economist. The fallacy of economic forecasting is don't ever try and forecast interest rates, and or more specifically, if you're a real estate economist, mortgage rates, because you will always be invariably wrong. I think there's a piece to that sentence missing, but that's kind of like, okay, the weather forecaster coming out and saying, I'm going to put a disclaimer on it. Pretty much everything I'm going to tell you is going to happen in the next days is invariably not going to happen. So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of funny. That said, we've got Freddie Mac. Yep. Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Mortgage Bankers Association, NAR, all come out with what they think rates are going to be doing. And so if we look at their projections going out into Q3, Q4, and then Q1 of 2022, you can see that all of them are showing that their projected rate projections are showing that rates are going to stay about where they are right now. So, getting one person's opinion helpful and valuable. Getting the economist from 4 different major institutions is definitely more helpful. So next slide, please. Okay, this is one of my favorite things. I put this in here and I call it the power script. And so, one of the things that I'm sure you guys are hearing, and some of the things that we're hearing from buyers right now is, wow, I don't know if I should do anything. Like, rates were at this low point, and maybe we should just hold off and decide to do this at a later stage. And I thought this was a great way of talking to your clients. So this is one of those things that I would chew on it. I would converse. I would share it with people. Yes, it's true that you may not get the same rate you would have 5 weeks ago. However, you will get a better rate than what was possible at almost any other point in history. Let's connect today so we can lock in a great rate while this stays low. So to put that into perspective, next slide, please. I think you guys have seen this one before. Interest rates over the time. In the 70s, the average 30-year rate, 8.86. In the 80s, 12.7%. I mean, to me, that's like a bad credit card. At some point in the 80s, I think we hit like 18%. In the 90s, 8.1. In the 2000s, 6.29. And by the way, the funny thing about this slide is actually from July of last year. I was looking for the slide and I thought, I know I've got this interest rates over time piece. And it turns out that last year's rates are exactly where they are today. So again, I would take this and add this to your buyer presentation book just to give people perspective. Charlie was on me this morning because I was a little bit delayed, tardy getting this presentation to you. And the reason behind that is that there's something that I had in my archive folder that I've been talking about this for weeks. And I said, I've got to dig this up. So check this out. Next slide, please. All right. A slide showing 30-year fixed interest rates, guys, going back to 1796. I mean, how crazy is that? Over 200 years of mortgage rates. Now, this slide was actually put together in 2015 when rates were about 4%. So if we had, I've got to find the updated slide showing rates in the 3.25%. But guys, look at this. I mean, you're going back to like the early 1900s before we saw rates even close to this low. And to be able to look back and say to a buyer over 200 plus years, guys, you might have missed the low of the low, but guess what? The lowest rate in history is defined as 1 point in time, right? And time is showing you that where we are now is still like in the 99.99 percentile. And it's, I love that somebody circled it. Mortgage rates at 16% in 1980. That to me is like really, really scary. So take this one, print it out, put it in your buyer book. This is one of those cool things that people look at and they're like, wow, you really know your stuff. So anyway, next slide, please. Okay. That is correct. So the comment from Alex is that there were no 30-year mortgages until the new deal. What the chart is actually showing is what mortgage rates would have been if we had mortgage rates. And so what the chart actually identifies is the 10-year treasury. So there's a correlation between the 10-year treasury and 30-year fixed mortgage rates. So thanks for pointing that out. This is giving you that if we did have 30-year fixed rates, that's what it would look like. All right, next slide, please. Okay, had some other questions about underwriting. I've heard some things about underwriting guidelines changing. And I wanted to address that and hit two things real quick. Number one, if anything, at Fairway, we've seen underwriting guidelines loosen a little bit over the course of the last couple months. So we're definitely not seeing any sort of tightening. If you guys are hearing anything about tightening guidelines, chances are it's what are called overlays. So for those of you that have been around the business for a while, you know that an overlay is simply a rule that a lender puts in place above and beyond what the rules are for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, et cetera. So I haven't seen it, but I thought this chart was really interesting. This looks at the credit score distribution of home buyers over the last 12 months. And check it out, 50% of home buyers in the last 12 months had credit scores below 749. So I think I've shared this with you guys before. 50% of people in this country still think you need 20% down to buy a mortgage. They still think you need perfect credit. You got a whole heck of a lot of buyers that are in that 600 to 700 range. Next slide, please. The other thing I wanted to share is something that's called the Mortgage Credit Availability Index that comes from Mortgage Bankers Association. And I could spend a lot of time on this, but it would be the most boring thing we could ever talk about. Suffice it to say that we are showing on this chart that credit availability right now compared to, I think that chart goes back to like 2006. That was prior to the crash. Basically, prior to the crash, if you had a heartbeat, if you had a pulse, you could get a mortgage. Credit availability was rampant. Literally, housing, huge contributor to the housing crash. Since then, things have tightened up. But if you look at the tightening, it's really been pretty flat since that point in time. So next slide, please. So this is one other thing that we just put together, and I'm hearing a lot, and I'd love to get your feedback, everybody, about this. But I'm hearing a lot of lenders right now are having challenges with appraisals not coming in at or even at the accepted offer price. So we did a query. We looked back at Fairway in the Metro Milwaukee area over the last year and a quarter, I think it was. And I think we had 733 appraisals that we did. And of those 733 appraisals, it was actually, this graphic is a little bit off. We were higher than 90% of the appraisals that we did either came in at or above the accepted offer price. There were just a handful of deals that came in low. So I don't know what that means relative to the rest of the industry, but I'm starting to hear things indicate that, in some cases, people are saying every other appraisal that we're doing is coming back and it's coming in shy and it's killing us. So, I thought this would be a buyer asked about this quarter, and I did an analysis on this, and it looks like every quarter has been consistent. In other words, it hasn't changed this quarter compared to Q3 or Q4 of last year. I'm going to do a little bit more digging to see if we can find out what the trends are across different lenders. But I suspect that what we're going to find is that the appraisers that we're using are much more, let's just call it user friendly in terms of establishing and helping obtain value to support the sale. So that's good news. So stay tuned on this one. Next slide, please. Another thing that we're seeing, and this is just a recommendation, as you're talking with your buyers, as you're talking with the lenders that are providing the pre-approval, asking the question, hey, in the event that the appraisal does come in shy, do your buyers have the cash to make up the difference between any potential gaps? If I'm in your shoes, I'm going to want to know that before I'm writing the offer as opposed to after, or, So I would add that to your checklist of questions to ask your buyer. And I would also add it to the checklist of things that you talk to about the lender. And guys, that's it. Bottom line, we've got, our job is to be heroes to you guys. We want to make your job easier. We want to make you look like a hero to your clients, and we want to help you guys be more successful. So you can contact myself. Blake on my team does a fabulous job. We're here for you guys. Anything you saw today that you'd like to get copies of, send over. And thanks.
Cool, Brian. Thanks for the update. It, one of my big takeaways, and I would relate this whether it's to rates or even home pricing, right? Either whether it's the lowest rate in history or whether it's the highest price in history in terms of as it relates to price in the housing market. It's one point in time.
Right.
But if you look at it as a historical context over the last 6 to 12 months, that one point in time is relative to everything else that's going on. And so it's still an incredible time to buy. I think one of the other things I really enjoyed is underwriting, kind of dispelling some myths around underwriting, dispelling some myths around appraisals, and understanding, across those 4 major organizations around where they predict rates to go. They kind of see rates settling in a little bit around that 3.25 rate for the time being. And yes, is it higher than what we had seen at 2.8 or 2.7? Yes, but it's still, when I bought my first house 4 or 5 years ago, it was 4.5. So it's still really, really, really cheap money. And I don't suspect that will have an impact on demand, as you kind of stated earlier. So thanks for jumping on. We appreciate the information.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, jumping into it, upcoming training and events. And guys, I'm throwing this up front because I want to hammer this. We have some great stuff coming up and a few events I really wanted to call out. First, specifically, this week, Thursday, Paul Nikolic is hosting a barbecue at Innovation Drive. Many of us will be there. He is a master of smoked meats. We'll have salads, sandwiches, drinks. Come check out the new space on Innovation Drive. Be there Thursday this week, April 8th at 12 noon. With that, a few other things. Again, I keep hammering this home for this week. Both Sydney and Julia send this out on a weekly basis. As a reminder, guys, not only do we have some great stuff coming up in the Market Center this week that I'll touch on here in a second, but also I want to make sure that you guys are paying attention to the live streams and webinars that are available this week. Some things to pay attention to. Right? Create a culture. For those of you who have a team at 1:30 on Wednesday, create a culture that retains talent. Agent sites, walk through Q&A, right? There's so many great things. The other thing I want to call out is Friday afternoons. For those of us who've had the opportunity to hear from Brady with KW Luxury, the new KW Luxury Learning Series is absolutely incredible. And there's another one this week, Friday at noon. All on the live streams and webinars available through KW Connect, which you can access through command, as well as when Sydney or Julia send this out. All of this is hyperlinked through here. So all you have to do is click to the hyperlink and it takes you right to Connect to check this out. Next up in the month of April, as we kicked off last week, reminder, a couple things this week is the barbecue at Innovation Drive that we talked about, as well on Friday at 11 o'clock. Is the first time homebuyer seminar series. What do I mean by that? Here's what I know. Last year, 41% of all homebuyers were first time homebuyers. 41% of all transactions had a first time homebuyer. And we have 2 people who are killing the first time homebuyer game. Catherine Cronin and Chrissy Klasky. Learn their tips, tricks, and strategies of how they activate first time homebuyers to secure leads and help them navigate the process. So they're going to walk through their process to help you educate yourself in terms of if I am looking at my business and I am missing first-time home buyers as it relates to my buyer pool, you're missing out on a massive opportunity. So learn from those guys Friday at 11. A couple other things to call out. The following 3 Wednesdays, there's some incredible guest speakers with lead generation with Gene Revers is a whole day thing. We will have this live streamed at all 3 locations in the training room, all 3 in Lake Country Innovation Drive, as well as North Shore. Then the following week on the 21st, we got Dave Jenks, the author of the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. He comes with what I call the meat and potatoes, guys. He gives you tons of things to take away that is great action items for you. He's an incredible speaker. Again, he jumps right into it at 1 o'clock on the 21st. And then lastly, the one thing I want to call out is on the 28th, we have the Loken Group that did $620 million in closed production last year. for their team down in Houston, Texas. Their operations team leads of 5 different people are going to be leading our admin mastermind. So whether you run a team, whether you're an admin for a team, whether you are thinking about hiring an admin, it's a great group to jump on to learn, again, their strategies of how they manage such a large book of business down in the Houston, Texas area. And mind you guys, that 620 isn't a brokerage. That's one team, right? All right, coming up this week, J9, this week, Tuesday, Amanda is out. So Stephanie Mick is going to be hosting from the Contract Helpline, is going to be hosting the launch coaching at 10:30 this morning on Tuesday morning. And J9, what do we got coming on Thursday?
Thursday, we are going to talk about acceleration clauses, how to use them if you're writing an offer to purchase, and how to decipher them if you are a listing agent and you're presenting those, as well as what your calendar looks like on a daily, weekly, monthly basis as a new agent and what it should look like. So that's what we're going to cover on Thursday.
Awesome. Thanks, Janine and Connie, for doing that. All right, here we go. Lindsay Vranick, Tech Tuesdays, listing and buyer presentations. What do we got?
All right, so training today and this week really is centered around creating those listing and buyer presentations within Designs in Command. So there's 2 different sections for the listing and for the buyer presentation. And within those, there's 5 different templates that you can choose from. And the great thing about this is that you can customize these any way that meets that particular client and your business. And there's about over 25 different pages that you can pick and choose from. So you don't have to use the entire presentation that's in there. You literally scroll through, choose the pages that you want to include in your presentation, and then you can customize those. So there's pages for going into your marketing and your media plan. You can highlight your credentials and your awards, past sales, testimonials. One of the really great pages that's included is the process for buying and selling. And I know a lot of people are always looking for something like that. This is already created in Command in these presentations. And again, you can customize this. So if there's 1 or 2 that's a little off, maybe you don't really like the verbiage, you can change that. There's also a page to promote your KW consumer app. So this is great to bring up in conversations anytime you're meeting with a new seller or a new buyer. Promote your KW app, share that app with them immediately. And that page is just going to detail the really the benefits of using the app. So again, so many different pages that you can pick and choose from. It's super easy to customize this and then download that presentation so that you can share that with your clients via email or print it off and hand it to them if you're meeting them in person. So a few different examples of just some of the pages that you can choose from. So this is just one of the templates with the very consistent design that you see here. So today, tech training is in person again. It's at the North Shore office at 1 o'clock. And a couple changes for Thursday out in Lake Country. So because we wanted to make sure everyone's able to go to the barbecue in Tosa at noon, we bumped up training to 10:30. So right after productivity. So I'll be doing kind of a combination of trainings at 10:30. So the designs training on the listing and buyer presentations, and then I'll be going into the creating that custom newsletter within Smart Plans. So I know a lot of people wanted that one again out in Lake Country. So we'll be doing a combination of trainings on Thursday, but just note that time change. It's starting at 10:30.
Cool. Lindsay, thank you guys. You know, if I'm thinking to myself, either A, I've had a listing presentation or buyer consultation for forever, and I'm thinking about updating it, or if I've never had one and I've just kind of gone off the cuff and you're thinking about updating it now, why recreate the wheel? There's so much great content in Command where they've studied the top people and what makes the top people successful in their presentations, and they've housed that all in Command. That's the benefit of leveraging and utilizing some of those resources so you don't have to recreate the wheel. So if you have questions on it, don't hesitate to reach out to Lindsay or set up a one-on-one with her. She is happy to be a resource for you so you don't have to recreate the wheel. All right, Steph, you're leading us first with some compliance updates all around cautionary tales when you waive your inspection. So Steph, what are we talking about?
Hi, good morning, you guys. We just wanted to revisit protocol around the inspection contingency and when it is being waived or omitted in the offer to purchase. Now that this is a lot more prevalent in today's market with competitive offer writing, just from a compliance standpoint, there's certain verbiage we need. So again, in the offer to purchase, if you are going to omit the inspection contingency, it's not enough just to omit it. We need to have a written waiver as well. And just as a reminder, this is mostly needed for the opportunity to deduct the E&O
Deductible.
the deductible, thank you. Post-closing if a claim is made. So the four things, as a reminder for those, for the deductible reduction is the seller real estate condition report signed by all parties, the home warranty waiver or invoice, and then point 3, which is what we're talking about now, a copy of the home inspection report. But then in lieu of that, if there is no home inspection, then we need the inspection waiver. And then, of course, everything being written on our standard Wisconsin approved sales contracts. So next slide. So there are 3 ways to get this if you are representing the buyer. So if you are representing the buyer writing the offer, if you're omitting the inspection contingency, in the additional provisions, please write buyer waives their right to a home inspection. If you forget to do this, there's 2 more opportunities. After acceptance, you could execute a notice stating that the buyer waives their right to a home inspection. And then 3, if you do not do this, you can also cover yourself with an amendment to the buyer agency agreement, stating that the buyer waives their right to a home inspection. And there's also hold harmless language as well that we have included in our zip forms clause library. So we've got that language all set up for you guys. On the flip side, if you are representing the seller, you'll need to rely on the buyer's agent to get this waiver. So if you know ahead of time that a buyer plans to waive their home inspection, you can communicate with the buyer's agent ahead of time saying, please don't forget to include this language. Oftentimes we don't know that information. So after acceptance, you can execute your own amendment stating that the buyer waives their right and then send it off to the buyer's agent to get it signed by the buyer. And then also a notice is sufficient, but when we're acting as listing agents, I think it's better to just execute an amendment to get the process started. And that is all I have. And now we've got Joni.
All right, guys, one of the things that we really want to reiterate and drive home is as it relates to people waiving inspections, totally cool. Just make sure that you have it in writing so that you have a paper trail to it, again, to protect you from an E&O standpoint, and making sure that if you plan to use the forms library that also have pre-drafted language around quickly popping into the WB 47 amendment to the buyer agency agreement around hold harmless is also extremely strong, again, to help you mitigate your liability when people begin to waive inspections, as we've seen very commonly in this market. All right, Joan, we had a very interesting conversation as it relates to the MLS and excluded listings. So give us some insights into that conversation that we had with Chris Carrillo and Alan Deutsch, the legal counsel for the Metro MLS.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It was a very interesting meeting, just sitting in a Zoom meeting with MLS and their attorney and really getting the depth of excluded listings and what MLS is trying to say to us, what the NAR is trying to say to us in clear and how we treat excluded listings. So to share that information, one of the key points that they kept drilling in that the listing agent must be consistent on following that the seller's wishes. The seller can have a lot of different wants if they want it to be exclusive, and the listing agent must list what their actual motivations are. So, and then respond consistently. Okay, next slide. So in finding out what the motivation is to selling outside of MLS, make sure that you can educate your sellers. A lot of times they want, oh, my friend sold their house and nobody knew about it and they only had 2 showings and they sold it and things like that. I think it's smart to get into the motivation really of why a seller wants an excluded listing. And it isn't necessarily an elite way of listing your house. In many cases, it's a way of not getting as much money for your house. And I think that it's your obligation in giving the listing presentation or discussing this marketing or lack of marketing with your seller, that it does impact their ability to not only market the house, but maybe to get their best price for the house, to maximize their return on investment through competition. If you only have a very few people knowing about the property and seeing it, you have a very small pool of competition for that house. If you have a large pool, you're going to be highest and maximum return. So talk to your sellers. Why do you want this? We as the listing agents should not be promoting it. We should be educating our sellers on what it really is. Do they want privacy? I mean, obviously, we have people in the Milwaukee community who are well known to everyone. I mean, sports stars and big figures that everybody knows of, and they do want privacy. They don't want the entire Milwaukee market to know exactly where they live, and they don't care. They're not going to this amount of money. They want it just dribbled out there. Do they want just a limited number of showings because of COVID or because of situations in the house? I mean, maybe they have someone in the house that is going to be disturbed by a lot of showings. So they don't care that they're not going to get the highest return. They want to limit it. And another very common one, the house isn't ready for sale. You want to lock down the listing, but they don't want any showings at that point. So whatever the motivation is, you have to respect their motivation and gear the handling of this listing based on what the seller's needs are. And how does the listing agent determine who knows about the property? There are many exceptions to the rule. I have one myself. I had a $2 million listing, and it was not sold by one of the top agents in the Milwaukee community. It was sold by a brand new licensee that I had never heard of. So we all know that necessarily the buyers come to all agents and not necessarily maybe the top producers. They usually have especially if you're dealing with high-end properties, they usually have the high-end buyers. But again, you don't want to be limiting anything like that. You don't want to be showing that you're limiting anything like that, because that's called restraint. Next. So the downside is if you get caught marketing it, and that means in writing with an email or a text or sort of a flyer sent to just your favorite people in the marketing world. And if MLS hears about it, it is $1,000 per day fine. And they're tough on this. It's not just Milwaukee MLS. This is NAR, directed from NAR, and they're trying to prevent antitrust situations. And antitrust is really just some people are making a forcibly small or having some limited ability to who the consumers are, who the other agents are. And one thing that we're all afraid of, and especially all of our attorneys are afraid of in real estate, are antitrust violations. So that's why we're hammering this in, and it's important that you all clearly understand what excluded listings. MLS, Chris referred to it as office exclusives. And that is something that we have to consider. It really is an office listing, an office exclusive. But the other thing that Chris and the attorneys kept repeating, this comes to trust, that knowing that the listing is being handled fairly and the agent understands and respects the seller's needs, that the agent is not using it as a business practice, taking all their listings at excluded and then control who sees their listings. Charlie looked into a lot of our numbers and we don't seem to have anyone violating that as a business practice at this point. So the main thing that we want to really pass along to you that we got from MLS is don't put anything in writing about excluded listings. And that means any kind of writing. It means text, text to one of your great friends who happens to be at another company, an email. Keep it only in verbal phone communication or one-on-one communication, but keep it out of text, keep it out of emails, keep it out of social medias. And you yourself, if you have a big buyer coming into town and you want to know what excluded listings are out there, MLS doesn't publish the addresses in. And so you send a text to all of your favorite agents throughout the North Shore Marketplace. Do you have anything? I've got a $12 million buyer. That cancellation of the excluded listing if the listing agent answers and agrees that they have one. If the seller is looking for privacy, that's what you give them. So be consistent and keep it out of writing.
Yeah, I one of the things I want to reiterate, because Joan and I were both on the call with the MLS on this policy. It's very clear to us that most brokerages, not most, but a lot of brokerages or agents specifically across the Metro MLS are unaware of the policy and its impact. And I know that many agents are still texting a group of people saying who's got what, who has off market, who has pocket listings, all these sorts of things. And one of the things I would, highly recommend to anybody is if you get those texts, I would not respond. I would pick up the phone and call them, because there is a major concern as it relates to not only antitrust and the viewpoint around antitrust in some of these major lawsuits that are happening across the country, but there's also a fair housing implication here, and that we need to ensure, especially April being Fair Housing Month, and we'll have more on that here shortly, but you need to make sure that you're mitigating risk and exposure when you utilize excluded listings for seller privacy, and be consistent in your approach in terms of how you communicate with agents and making sure that it is verbal. And if someone does inquire via email or text and you want to share information, you are able, but I would pick up the phone and call them. I would not reply via text or email. So, Joan, thank you for jumping on to tell us that. I know it's kind of a thick process, and thankfully we as a group at KW, I had pulled all of our excluded listings in the month of March, and it's very, very few. But those that use it, I definitely understand there's a reason for it. I just want to make sure that we're protecting your liability as it relates to the use of excluded listings. Any questions on that topic, don't hesitate to reach out to Steph, Joan, myself around clarity or when to best use it or not use it or things like that. We definitely want to make sure that we're protecting you as it relates to excluded listings. All right. Last week we talked about thermometer versus thermostat, right? And are you taking cues from the outside world, or are you setting the mood and determining the temperature of the room, right? And I want to reiterate this around the thermometer or thermostat as we look to what is the market of the moment and what is March telling us, right? So let's take a look at the market insights. And reminder, right? Everything we want to look at and focus on and that you should be judging yourself in your activity zone is on your lead metrics, right? These are indicators of future successes or incomes, right? And in the industry, in my opinion, where we have a problem is everybody relates their success on lag metrics, which is the results of prior activities, but they're not indicators of future success or income, right? So we need to be looking at the lead. Where are we going? You're not in this for a great year. You are in this for a great career. And how are you managing your lead metrics effectively? So jumping into it, I don't have this updated for March yet because I don't have this report. But one of the things, again, guys, what I wanted to remind you in February, and again, I'll update this for March once I get the report. I always get this report on the 9th day of the month around the future indicators is around contracts written units. And if you look back here to August, everything as it relates to the future indicators of what happened showed up when contracts written units. You can see here, August up 30%, September, the business closed units was up 24. Contracts written in October were up 31%. Closed units in November were up 22. So my word of caution here is having contracts written down 12% in February. I'll be very interested to see where this shows up for March as it relates to future indicators for our business. And one of the things, again, you know, I pointed out last time, but as we start to look back at 2020 and we look at hurdle comps, one of the things that you'll start to see me do today and moving forward is I'm going to look at the last 2 years, because I think as you see here in terms of closed units, when we went month by month in the month of April through October of 2020, we're going to see some very misleading numbers coming out of the industry. And you're probably going to see some very misleading numbers being reported across the media, because closed units, our hurdle comps were so low in the spring season last year, and then they were artificially inflated August, September, October in the fall. So we got to look at 2 years of data, and I'm really looking at 2019 as a good baseline as to way that the market operates to best give you guys of what is going on in the marketplace. So you'll notice that today I'm going to report the 2020 numbers, but I'm also going to report the 2019 numbers again, because it's not so much for March, but as we look ahead or look back on April, May, and June, I don't want the numbers to be deceiving, to make you think, again, I don't want to make you think that the market is artificially better than it actually is, because we have such low hurdle comps coming up. So it's something that I'll be paying attention to, is blending 19 and 20 together to get the true indicator of what's going on. So don't believe everything that's put in the media as it relates to the industry ahead, as we look ahead to April, May, and June. Be very cautious, be very steadfast in your approach to your activities, and remain consistent to what made you successful to where you are today. Right. So when we look here at showing activity across all of North America, you saw a little bit of dip last week. Reminder, the dark blue line is 2020 showing activity. The light blue line is 2019 showing activity. And the orange line is 2021 showing activity. The little bit of dip that we had here in the last week, it's not concerning to me. It was simply the dip because of the Easter holiday. You saw that same dip happen here in 2019 because of the Easter holiday was a little bit later in the month of April. So we're just hurdling non-matching holiday weekends. But then again, this relates to North America. And then how are we specifically performing in the state of Wisconsin? And you can see here in the state of Wisconsin, right? State of Wisconsin, if you look at the comparables, again, North America 2021 versus 2019, I'm not even going to pay attention to 2020 because it's such an outlier within the data. But when you look here at the gap between the two of 21 versus 19 in North America, and then you look at the gap between 21 and 19 in the state of Wisconsin, you can see that demand in the state of Wisconsin for homes right now continues to remain, it's the outlier. And what I mean by that is it is outpacing industry averages across the United States and North America. Again, very, very positive. The dip last week doesn't concern me, again, because there's a mismatch in holiday weeks as it relates to comps. Now, I'm going to jump in. Here is what the sales absorption rate is, right? And here's what you need to know. It's the percentage of inventory that goes under contract. It's the major indicator of demand. And when we report this on a weekly basis, so you see around 10 to 15%. So when you aggregate it for a month, here's the story that I need you to understand, and stay with me here. In the peak of 2019, we saw a sales absorption rate of 28% in the month of April. That was its peak. Now let's jump ahead to 2020. We saw the peak sales absorption rate. Again, it's the percentage of inventory that goes under contract at 33% in the month of August. When you consider that over the last 2 years of data, in March of 21, we had 41% of the total inventory in the month of March went under contract. I'm not quite sure we've had that in maybe ever, to essentially say almost half of the homes went under contract in the single month is an incredibly strong indicator of the demand within the marketplace. And I have a few other things that also show you that, right? So when we look at March of 2020, based on this data here, it's the highest we've seen in 2 years. And when you compare that versus the strength of March of 2020, it was 72% stronger, and it was 64% stronger than March of 2019. Again, incredible demand as it relates to units that are going under contract against total inventory. Now, here we go. Units that went under contract. Again, this is a leading metric because it's telling us what is going to lead to future closings or future income, right? When we look at it in March of 2021, there were 2,393 units that went under contract. Again, as it relates to the last 2 years of data of going back to March of 2019, when you compare it, March versus 2020, it was 14% stronger this year versus last year, and it was 6% stronger this year versus 2019, March of 2019. Again, so I'm looking at 2 years of data to really making sure that we're taking the outlier, what was, I believe, to be an outlier of last year, based on everything that happened. You can see, again, units that went under contract, despite low levels of inventory, remains incredibly strong, right? So another thing to note, right? A lot of people think March is like the peak of the spring selling season. Well, here's what you really know. Historically, usually it's only the 6th or 7th best selling month of the year. So March historically is right in the middle of the road as it relates to the strength of the market in terms of units that are getting done. So if you're sitting here saying, oh my gosh, I had a great March, or oh my gosh, I didn't have a great March, here's what you need to know. March is right in the middle of the road. So you have time to course correct, knowing that April, May, June, July, August we are heading into the peak selling season. You have time to course correct, but you have to take massive action today, knowing that we're heading into the peak selling season. And you can see where these peaks and valleys really fall. Again, May, June, July, August, even into September last year. But March is really around the middle of average in terms of peak selling season. We are heading into peak selling season as it relates to that. Now, when we look at new unit inventory, right? March, there were 2,563 new units that came to the market in the month of March. When we compare that versus last year, it was down around 8.9%. And we compare that versus March of 2019, down 12%. Again, it's concerning. We're going the opposite way here as it relates to trends, but it's been on par with about where it's been. Here's the really good news, though. If I'm taking a caveat from a trends perspective, new inventory units that were coming to the marketplace was positive net 170 units versus those that went under contract. So again, those that went under contract was roughly 2,400, and roughly new units that came to the marketplace was 2,563. That's a net positive gain for inventory plus 170. It's not going to fix our inventory woes, but it's definitely helping the inventory woes, right? It's a leading metric. Expired listings, I want to bring this up because I know many people focus on, let's just call it FSBOs and expireds. Expireds are way down. There were 442 listings that were when expired in the month of March in 2021. That number was down 28% versus 2020 and down 21% versus 2019. The market is moving very efficiently. If a home is listing, it's very, very low chance that it's going to expire. And you can see 442 over the last, 2 years worth of data going back month by month is one of the lowest numbers on the graph, and that's coming off actually February, which was the lowest month ever at 365 in the last 2 years of data of expired listings. So my word of caution here is if you focus on expired listings, you need to diversify your lead generation pool as how you win listings, because they're so few and far between right now in today's market. Again, a leading metric. It means we have good, efficient processes of inventory moving through the system. Now, months of supply inventory, here is the scariest stat I pulled all day. When you look at it again, going back on the 2 years worth of data, a balanced market is 6 months of supply. A balanced market is 6 months of supply. In the last 1 year, just the last 1 year, our average was 2.1 months of supply of inventory. And in March, we had the lowest months of supply inventory in the last 2 years at 1.2 months. Essentially, what does that mean? It means we have, based on units that go under contract and sell, we have 1 month of total supply. That is very, very bleak information as it relates to the total inventory available. So let's jump into the total inventory, right? We're right now sitting at 5,816 units for sale in the month of March. When you compare that versus the last 2 years of historical data, in March of 2020, it's down 33%. In March of 2019, it's down 35%. Here's what you need to know. Someone comes into you and says, runs into you at Sendix and says, hey, Ellen, what's going on in the market? And you're like, gosh, demand is incredible. Homes are flying, and yet we need more homes. How do we know that? Well, on average, we have about 3,000 to 4,000 fewer homes that would normally be on the market at this time of year. It's down around roughly 30%, 30 to 40%, depending on the month. It's tight. But we're doing, people are moving through the process when they get through, and mortgage rates are historically at continue to be at historic all-time lows. So when you look at it at roughly this time, in the last 2-year average, sitting in the month of March, we usually have around 8,600 homes in the marketplace. Again, there are 3,000 less homes available in southeastern Wisconsin for your buyers to choose from right now. So here is a little bit of an educational thing, and we shared some insights around the economic recovery over the last several months. And I want to kind of bring back some things, because now I'm going to go into price points, and it'll help you understand when I've shared some of this information before, how it's correlating to the price points of the market of the moment that we are in today, right? And this was shared about a month ago as it relates to unemployment and income by sector. And what you need to know here is on the left are all of the professional services that make the most amount of income, okay? And the blue line is weekly earnings, the most amount of income. What you see here on the right side, transportation, education, retail, leisure, and hospitality, are those that make the least on a weekly earnings standpoint. And yet, here's what's happening. Those that make the least have the highest rates of unemployment. Those that make the most have the lowest rates of unemployment. That's what you need to discern from this slide right here, because it's going to show up in the impact on the pricing segment. Okay, now let's jump into it. We've talked a little bit about, and I think I shared this back in maybe September, October of last year. It was December of last year, because I see this here. And it talked about a K-shaped recovery. And we talked about, again, lowest income earners with the highest amount of unemployment. And you look at US labor statistics that say 1 in every 20 employed people works in the travel industry, and 1 in every 12 US employed people works in the service industry. Well, and if you think about it, again, going back to this, of those who make the most amount of income have had the least amount of impact as it relates to unemployment. You can see here, as they've talked about with the K-shaped recovery, those indirectly impacted businesses and industries are those that make the most amount of money, and those that have been the directly impacted industries make the least amount of money. This is a little bit of the catch-22 that we're in right now in terms of economic recovery. And I firmly believe that the vaccination rollout is key to consumer confidence. Whether you believe in the vaccination or not is totally your choice, and I totally respect that, right? But it is important for consumer confidence that we get back to helping those that make the least amount of money get back to employed and earning wages that help us, because we know that 72% of our inventory in southeastern Wisconsin is below 350,000. So I bring this all of you to you, and and some of this is stuff we've shared with you in the past. So what does it actually mean, and why am I going back to it? Well, let's break down the pricing segments. Here's what you need to know. And what you need to know is when you look at less than 350,000 in terms of, it's 72% of the inventory, median price point sold is roughly flat. I mean, I don't really make up, $2,000 is not a major difference. And when you look at price per square foot, it gained a little bit, up 6.5%. But here's what I want to point out. What I want to point out is units went under contract. Remember, units went under contract were up, I think 10, 12% from the last slide in the month of March. Well, in this price segment, they were only up 5%. Closed units were down 6%. New unit inventory was down 9%, and total inventory was on par with the market, down 35%. Okay, so where I'm getting at, and you'll see as we progress into the next two price segments, is those that have been impacted the most as it relates to economy, unemployment, and weekly earnings is impacting the largest segment of our inventory below 350,000. Now, Let's go to the next price segment, 350,000 to 700,000. It's 21% of the inventory. You can see the massive jump in those units that are under contract. And again, pricing analysis, it was pretty negligible from a median price point sold, but price per square foot again was on par with the 300, less than 350, up 6.5% roughly. But units under contract in this price segment, again, 21% of the unit inventory was plus 34%. Remind you, less than 350 was only plus 5%. Sold, which is closed units, up 23%. New inventory was on par with the market, and so was total inventory. Again, so between 350 and 700, those that typically are making decent, this is what I would call middle class America that's making decent income, they are definitely, the housing market is being reflected accordingly within this price segment. Now, let's take a look in the luxury market in southeastern Wisconsin, which is how I define it, 700,000 and plus. When you look at it from a trend analysis, here's what you need to know. Units that went under contract in the 700,000 plus in the month of March was up 191%. Sold, which is closed units, was up 15% in the month. New unit inventory was no change. It was actually even to what it was last year, and total inventory, again, is on par with the rest of the market. What you can see very clearly here is what we defined in these last two slides around employment and those that make the most on a weekly basis. And as it relates to a conversation around the K-shaped recovery, you can see, this is 28% of the total inventory is having, which is where people are making the most amount of money and have impacted the least as it relates to unemployment, is having an incredible gain. But the problem is it's only 28% of the market. Where we need to continue to get back to as it relates to the economic recovery, and this is where it's the most important, is the less than 350,000 is 72% of the inventory. And you can see it's not trending at the pace of some of the other price segments. So again, as it relates to some of these economic impacts of some of the stimulus money or vaccination rollouts, whatever it may be, we really need to continue to get these things ramped up, because it's very important to our economy and very important to our industry, knowing that 72% of the industry is less than 350,000. So that was my big takeaway for today as it relates to the pricing analysis in segments. And then I compare it to the two economic slides that we've shared in the past, because that hit me over the head, like an anvil when I looked at these price segments and the impact it's having. And it's really, if we want our industry in terms of residential real estate to pick up, we need the macro economy to help those that are making the least amount of money in order for our industry to continue moving forward, because you can't drive an industry forward with only driving it with 28% of the total inventory. So with that, guys, I'm going to leave you with this. It is 10 o'clock on the dot. Every morning I get an email called the Daily Dose of Greatness. The Daily Dose of Greatness from an incredible author. And this morning's was, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style, from Maya Angelou. So there is your Daily Dose of Greatness. It shows up in my email every morning. If you want to sign up for the Daily Dose of Greatness, I can definitely pass it along. But guys, with that, enjoy the beautiful weather. If there's anything you need, we're here to serve you. Have a great day. Lake Country crew, I'll let you jet off to the Lake Country meetup for your meetup for Lake Country, North Shore, and the Innovation crew. I will stick around to do new listings and buyer needs. Guys, have a great week.
Yeah.